And we are live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am one of your co-hosts, Blake Ruffino. Alongside of me is, I guess, again, the Notre Dame man. Look at his hat, Joe DeLeone. Good morning, sir. How are we doing out there in L.A.? What time is it out here out there in L.A.?
It is 7:30 right now in Los Angeles, which, I mean, this isn't even the earliest I've been up for the show, but things are great, separate from the random shots I take for wearing a Notre Dame hat on the show. I'm excited, though. Later today, I'm going to the Genesis Invitational, which is played at Riviera Country Club in Los Angeles, so that should be fun.
Which one's Tiger playing in?
That's the one Tiger's playing in.
Okay. Did you see Tiger Woods handed old boy a Tampax?
No, really?
Yeah, I forget who he's playing with because so LSU and SU, like college baseball starting up, so it's been busy. So I haven't been able to sit down and watch the Invitational and watch really. I've seen some shots from Tiger. I know that he had a couple birdie shots back to back. Looked like he'd been doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really a Sunday golfer, like Sunday watcher. I can't really keep up with it during the week. But I forget. I think maybe Justin Thomas maybe is who he was with, and Tiger outdrove him, and Tiger slips him something, and Justin Thomas looks down, and it's like a Tampax pad.
Oh my God!
So Tiger's having a little bit of fun.
He can't be talking that kind of crap with the way that he's been playing. He barely made the cut, which is pretty pathetic. But look, I know that he's coming back from so much, and I really anticipate he's probably not going to be playing tomorrow based on the way that he's playing right now. Part of the reason why we're going on Saturday, so we can get to see Tiger a little bit, but should be an exciting day. Hopefully Tiger doesn't get himself into too much trouble.
Well, I mean, a dangerous tiger is a good tiger,
Right.
So, I mean, usually Saturday. This is the day that historically, though, Joe, this is the day that Tiger normally picks it up. Like Saturday's when he really starts picking it up. So you could watch him hit a round of golf. That's really good. But we're not here to talk about Tiger Woods.
Yes.
We're here to talk some college football here today. So, Joe, we've been really kicking this can down the road with Matt Rhule. We'll talk about that today. His 2023 expectations. Look, I don't mean this in a wrong way, but Matt Rhule has been a very big chatterbox now. He's been on social media. He's talked a lot. He's out there talking, and he's not saying anything bad. I don't mean it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're out there running them gums, you better be able to do something. I'm not necessarily a Matt Rhule fan. I think that Matt Rhule is just a builder. He's not a sustainer, but that might be what Nebraska needs. We'll talk about that here today. Also, former Cardinals head coach and the LA San Diego Chargers offensive coordinator, Ken Whisenhunt, we'll start off with that, is going to Alabama to join Nick Saban's staff as the assistant to the head coach.
Sneaky news.
Well, I think it's big, and I also think it tells us something about Nick that we probably – I think that there's more than we will talk about Ken Whisenhunt. I think that from my perspective, we'll talk a little bit more about Nick because he's done this multiple times. He's done it with Sark. He's done it with Butch Jones, and now he's doing it with Ken Whisenhunt. And look, if you guys fire Tommy Rees 3 games into his Alabama tenure, then you have all Ken Whisenhunt. And then to wrap up the show, we'll talk about sleeper college football teams. Joe, like we were talking about off air, that's pretty difficult. Is there a team like TCU that can come out of nowhere? I don't think anybody saw TCU coming, but I don't really know if there's a team out there that can replicate what they did last season.
Right. I think the funny thing about trying to pick and come up with a team for this, and we were talking about, is if you go off of metrics like returning production, if you look at the transfer portal rankings, a lot of the teams that you could pick from are like, okay, everybody's already talking about this team. We'd be clowns if we were, or not clowns, but we'd be cliche if we were just feeding into the hype for all these teams that have already being talked about. And some of them are Washington with Michael Penix coming back. And another really obvious one, I think the most obvious one, was Florida State with the way that they pulled in the portal and how good and the momentum that they had at the end of the season. So we're not going to talk about those teams because, again, they're being ranked very highly. A lot of national writers and reporters have acknowledged them as good programs and good teams for next year. I think we've got some good picks, though. I think there'll be some interesting picks for what we're going to talk about.
I think it just really, you got to define to yourself what is a sleeper team. I did this video for Believe this week, and they had asked me who are some sleeper contenders, and my three was biasly LSU. I guess I was with you. I picked Florida State, right? Like I admittedly picked Florida State. You're gonna really love my third one. I think Oregon was my third. But I'm with you on some teams. It's a little bit difficult. Like people say Colorado, but like you mentioned earlier, that could be pretty, really cliche. But there is one team that I think that nobody's talking about that's going to have good, but they're in the Power Five. I think that they could do some good things. We'll talk about that later on in the show. I'll just say this. I'll give you a hint on mine. It feels breezy to be cheesy. That's all I'm going to say on my. Yeah, you'll get it. Just think of like cheese. Where do you get cheese?
I think we picked the same team. We're going to find out.
Okay. Hey, on three, say your team. 1, 2, 3. Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Okay. Boy, we didn't even collab on this. It's like Step Brothers from I'm Will Ferrell and you're the curly-headed guy. What's his name?
John C. Riley.
John C. Riley. Okay. Yes. Well, how about
that? Minds think alike.
Well, you know what's sad for Wisconsin? Usually when you and I agree, it's usually really detrimental to a program. So, so we'll see.
Sorry, Wisconsin.
That'll be fun to talk about later on in the show. All right, let's do this. Everybody do us a favor by hitting the like and share. Share to all of those social media groups. Share to all of your social media pages. Thank you so much for everybody on Facebook. It's really catching on there. So do us a favor by hitting like and share the SEC groups, any groups that you're a part of. Share to your own social media pages. Joe, I'm still doing the $200 giveaway.
Yes,
we're gaining some subscribers. I think we're closing in on 400, so not too far from the 1,000. And go to AYS as well and subscribe there. Also, wherever you listen to podcasts, rate, review, and subscribe as well. We got all that fixed out. I had a lot of people messaging me over the last couple of weeks. Blake, I can't find it on the Apple Podcast.
We fixed it. We're good now.
I'm like, if I get one more goddamn message about the audio, I'm going to freak out. But nevertheless, it's there. All right. Everybody do us a favor. Hit the like and share. We'll be back in 50 seconds. We'll talk about our good friends over at betonline.ag. Got a lot to discuss here this morning. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to wager on all of your favorite sports, contests, events with the first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews for all the news for each league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, college sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information for live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head on over to BetOnline today and use your mobile device to join and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50, that's BELIEVE50, BLEAV 50, to receive your 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's betonline.ag, betonline.ag. We're back.
Every time that gets me juiced up, Blake. I don't know why.
Me too. I do want to show you something really quickly. Okay, you ready?
Okay.
We didn't even talk about this.
Okay.
I want to show you something. I want you to, and don't peek, don't cheat. Don't cheat. I want to do a blind resume with you right quick. You ready?
Okay.
Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. It won't let me do it. Oh, never mind. I saw this. We'll have to reload these. So it's on the background. It's not in the
it's not on the images.
I can't bring it up. Anyway, I saw it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wanted to show Joe this, but for some reason it's not bringing it up. But we'll talk about that later on. All right, let's talk about Ken Whisenhunt. So if you missed the news today, or not today, this week, Ken Whisenhunt is a guy that's been around the NFL. He's actually been in college football the last couple of seasons. Ken Whisenhunt's been at Penn State the last 2 years as an offensive analyst. I didn't even know that. I didn't even know, and we talked about this last time. Like, man, these great offensive minds, we don't even know where some of them are at. But he's been at Penn State the last 2 years. Obviously, was in San Diego and the Chargers with Phillip Rivers, and now is going to be with Nick Saban as the assistant to the head coach. We know that Ken Whisenhunt's an offensive mind. Interesting thing that he did that. Now, I will admit, what's interesting about this with Nick, he didn't do that with Bill O'Brien, right? He's only done this with a certain amount of people. I guess when you saw Ken Whisenhunt's going to be the assistant to the head coach in Alabama, what were your first thoughts?
Yeah, immediately when this came to my attention, and you're the one who brought it up to me, it was a very sneaky headline because nobody was really talking about it. It doesn't really seem like headlines because it's special assistant to the head coach. A lot of people, and frankly myself, are asking, what the hell does special assistant to the head coach really mean in this circumstance? But if you do dive into it, we know the history and the background, the resume that Ken Whisenhunt has. I didn't even actually know until I was doing my notes that he was an offensive analyst with Penn State. So he's currently involved in the landscape of college football. My main simple takeaway, and I'm sure that we're going to kind of pick up and run from with this, is that this is great for Tommy Rees. This is great, a great added safety cushion for Tommy Rees. They've never had anyone like this at Notre Dame as almost a mentor. And I don't know if that was what the intention was.
What do you call Brian Kelly, though?
Well, Brian Kelly was his head coach. You know, like this to me, hiring Ken Whisenhunt is bringing in somebody with years and years and decades of experience calling an offense, scheming an offense at the highest level in the NFL. And I think that this is going to be a lot more direct one-on-one impact for Tommy Rees. And as much as we kind of clowned on Tommy Rees in the hire, this is good for his development. And as much as we kind of can sit here and say, is Nick losing it? He's always got a plan. He's always got a plan. And this seems to be part of the plan to make sure everything goes smoothly next season.
Well, I agree with that. I think Nick always puts fallback plans into place. Okay. I don't mean this in a wrong way to Tommy Rees, but Joe, if things start getting really bad, okay, which I don't think that they will get really bad, you have Ken Whisenhunt there, okay? Now, I would assume that Ken Whisenhunt's going to be breaking down film with Tommy Rees. He's going to be a lot on the offensive side of the ball. And I don't know if Ken Whisenhunt really wants to call plays because the crazy nature, Ken Whisenhunt could get a job in the league, okay? He could be any quarterback coach, wide receiver coach. He could be whatever he wanted to in the league. He's got that type of aura around him. I mean, look, a lot of people, and I'm old enough to remember, around 2019, 2018, when Phillip Rivers started to decline and he was the offensive coordinator there, I kept hearing people and admittedly didn't watch a lot of Charger football, but a lot of people saying that Ken Whisenhunt's an bad offensive coordinator. Well, it's crazy, Joe, when people start saying that kind of stuff, because every time I go down and I look at like what they did, I'm like, wait a minute. They were when he got fired, he was 10th in the NFL in offensive production with Phillip Rivers, a declining Phillip Rivers. In 18, they were 11th, and then in 17th, they were 8th. So, like, Ken Whisenhunt is a pretty damn good offensive mind. The only thing that I wonder here is how much does Nick not trust Tommy Rees? Like how much, because the times that he's done stuff like this, Steve Sarkisian, and Steve has had, and Sark has had a very big cloud around him for doing things outside of football. They got him fired at USC. We don't have to rehash that. Do you find it a little funny, though, that he brings somebody in on the two offensive coordinators that have had off-the-field issues, not off-the-field issues, but an off-the-field issue, and maybe that a guy in Tommy Rees that isn't experienced? Am I making sense there? Like, is there any correlation that Nick doesn't fully trust those OCs in that? Because Butch Jones moved on when Sark was running things. Nick could have easily made Butch Jones his next offensive coordinator at Alabama when Sark left, but he didn't.
Yeah, I don't think it's suspicious at all. I think that with all we had, just think of how many questions we had. We spent 30, 40 minutes really attacking this Alabama offensive situation and talking about how the heck are you going to go and hire a guy like Tommy Rees who has no track record of proven production? That was the whole debate that we were having. I think for as young as he is, it's not like we're hiring a guy who's been around the block and has bounced around and maybe had a hot couple of seasons kind of deal and that we're uneasy about it. Tommy Rees hasn't been calling plays for that long. He hasn't been a coach for that long. He's pretty recently removed from playing. He's in his early 30s, I want to say. Like, he's really, really young in the scheme of becoming an offensive coordinator. You need to have a cushion. You need to have some type of a cushion. And frankly, as negative as this is to say about my favorite team, this isn't Notre Dame. You know, you can't kind of figure out things as you're going. And he's also was a former quarterback there. His leash at Notre Dame is a lot different than the one at Alabama. There needs to be some type of protection put in place. And I don't think Tommy should be upset. If anything, Tommy should be elated that he has the opportunity to work with somebody like this. And plain and simple, Nick's not an offensive mind. He's not. He's a defensive-minded coach. Now, he's obviously a great coach, but I'm sure Nick's intention is not to micromanage Tommy Rees, and he doesn't want to have that.
Correct.
Whisenhunt allows for someone to not micromanage, but to help aid Tommy as he starts to get more acclimated to the SEC and the level of competition and learning to be a better offensive coordinator.
So let me just say this. If you're a great defensive mind, okay, like Nick, then you know offense. You know high level offense. Okay. Like I think if ultimately, if Nick Saban picked up an offensive play card and called an offense, I think he could do it.
Yeah.
Like okay. So
just like Bill Belichick could too.
Correct. Like,
yeah. I don't disagree with that.
And look, I think that a lot of these elite coaches could do it, because if you know, like, you know, it's crazy when, like, I talked to Brian Kelly and then he tells me, well, look, I was on the defensive side of the ball when I was at Grand Valley State. Like, I didn't come in here offensively, and then my offense sucked, so I picked up the offensive play card and was like, hey, this is fun. I like scoring points. Nick could do it. Dabo could do it. Kirby could do it. Like,
yeah.
But I agree with you. You said one thing that I think is just, you knocked it out of the park. He doesn't want to micromanage the offense. Okay. And now you have a high level head coach back-to-back times offensively on the offensive side of the ball. Now, we've talked about Bill O'Brien. What we all know, Bill O'Brien, head coach with the Texans. Look, the Texans did some really good things under Bill O'Brien. Let's not act like they didn't. Ken Whisenhunt did a lot of good things in Arizona with Kurt Warner. They got to a Super Bowl. We remember how that finishes. You remember James, what was his last name? Woodson, with the pick and then fell on his head at the 1 yard line because Larry Fitzgerald's just an absolute beast and trying to get down. Ken Whisenhunt can be that dude. And I agree with you. Here's the biggest thing that I think it tells me from a schemes perspective. Ken Whisenhunt is a passing game guru. Tommy Rees is not. Okay. And I think that Tommy does some good things when it comes to play calling in the running game. His offensive philosophy when it comes to throwing the football is not as elite as Ken Whisenhunt. Would you agree with that?
It's terrible. And that was one of the things that I talked about on the show and we reacted to it, is that if you ask him to scheme up a bunch of rushing plays and you lean on that strength, he's a really bright guy, very bright guy. But there is a lack of creativeness with throwing the ball. It's like the same 3-4 plays, which, to your point, Whisenhunt's going to help him with that.
Whisenhunt could, and Joe, I don't think people get this. You've been on a college team. I've been on a college team.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you call the same passing plays from different formations, like it might have a different concept. It might have a small little different concept here and there, but you're basically trying to do the same exact thing just from a different formation. Ken Whisenhunt, they can find 15 plays in the air, especially with a young quarterback, and what we would assume would be Ty Simpson or Jalen Milroe, that would come in and do some good things. I like the hire, I think, but on the flip side of all of this, okay, on the flip side, I don't think it necessarily impacts in-game calls, okay? We can talk about how good this is all the live long day and Ken Whisenhunt helping Tommy Rees, but Big Daddy, when it's 3rd and 4th, and you got to get a first down, okay, it doesn't help you. Now, you know what I did, Joe, when this hire was made? I went back and watched Alabama versus Tennessee, okay?
This past season.
From this past season. Buddy, their offense was as electric as I've ever seen one. If you go back and really watch it, like really watch what they did, okay? They were just so bad offensively when it comes to getting penalties. If they can't fix that, this is a moot point. We can sit here and talk about scheme all the live long day. We can talk about what Kid Whisenhunt brings. We can talk about what Tommy Rees brings or whatever. But, Joe, go back and watch that Tennessee game as an example. They would get into the end zone. Jamari Gibbs ran into the end zone, and Tennessee took the lead. I actually was going to send you some of this. I think I maybe did text you one thing. I don't remember.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay. Dude, they were down 28-10. Alabama came all the way back but the reason they didn't win that game, okay, is because they can't get out of their own way. Alabama has the talent. They have the recruits. They have they got some pieces in the portal, whatever. It does not matter who's on that team if the players do not buy into what Nick Saban brings. And I've been saying this for the last 2 years. It does not matter. Like, I feel like I'm the Rock. It doesn't matter what you think. If you can't get better there, Joe, this is a moot point. It doesn't matter.
Well, that definitely is a concern. And I think with the amount of roster attrition that has happened over this offseason, I think might be what it takes to fix some of that. And we even saw a former Alabama receiver, and I know this is kind of indirectly, but still directly related. A former Alabama receiver, I think it was Trayshawn Holden, who transferred to Oregon, who got arrested.
Right.
So, a part of me wonders if Saban had a lot of guys
that happened twice to him.
Yeah, but my point is that this last group of guys that were supposed to be important, maybe weren't totally bought in, maybe weren't the typical culture fits for Alabama, and that maybe we're a lot less disciplined. And now you are in a situation where they didn't take like a crazy haul from the portal like some other schools did. There were a lot of other programs that were ranked ahead of Alabama in terms of the portal rankings. But where they did transition is having the best recruiting class for the 2023 grouping. And that to me is starting from scratch, bringing in a young group of guys that you can mold. And it seems like Saban is almost past trying to go crazy in the transfer portal, because I think a coach like Nick Saban will say it's harder to bring in guys who fit your culture, who have already been playing somewhere else for a couple of years, and you don't know how they've been taught, how they've been handled by other coaches in the past, especially if they're coming from bad situations where they maybe were not handled properly or coached up or taught properly.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And look, they've had some issues there. Let's see if they can fix that. But none of this. Every time I say moot point, too, I feel like I'm in the episode of Friends when Joey says it's a moot point, and they're like, moot? Yeah, like a cow's opinion. So every time I say that, I remember Friends. Look, we'll see. To be honest with you, I'm kind of tired of talking about what Alabama can do offense. Like, there's so many things Alabama's got to do, okay, to get back on top. It has nothing to do with X's and O's, in my opinion. It has everything to do with being more disciplined. Let's see how they do there. All right, we spent a little time on that, so we can transition here. A topic, Joe, that we've been trying to get to for probably the last 3 or 4 weeks is Matt Rhule at Nebraska. Yes. As always, I'll let you kick this off. I will admit, though, to start this thing off, I'm just not a big Matt Rhule guy. I'm just not. Do I think he's a good dude? Yes. Do I think that he can build programs in college? Yes, we've seen it. However, I just don't know if he can sustain. I don't know if, like, everybody's saying that he's doing so good and doing this and doing that. Well, you made the question in the show topics. What is his true expectations in 2023? Go.
I think for 2023, we need to be realistic and looking at his past track record of taking over Temple and taking over Baylor. His first years were pretty terrible. 2-10 his first year at Temple, 1-11 in his first year at Baylor. But we look at the transitions from there, going to 6-6 at Temple, 7-6 at Baylor. You mentioned the one key thing here. Matt Rhule's a builder. He's not somebody who's going to step in and immediately they take off running. They're immediately a really good competitive team. I understand where you're coming from talking about, is he somebody who can produce sustained success? Now, we actually haven't really been able to see sustained success from Matt Rhule because, heck, he's a job hopper. He's a guy who bounces from the next job to the next one. Where I am optimistic, though, and I think what is very key for the long-term future of Nebraska is if he is in it for the long haul, he is in a position where he wants to stay and stick around for a long period of time. And Nebraska fans and the Nebraska administration need to hope that that's the case. He's got no ties to the university, so that might not actually happen. In terms of 2023, though, I think one of the key things that I always pay attention to, and we're going to talk about when we get to Wisconsin as well, when we talk about our sleeper team that we're both agreeing on, I always look at what they brought in for the transfer portal. I look at how they did in recruiting. They finished 23rd this past year. They finished with the 16th best transfer portal class. And there's some sneaky good players in there. Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech is a really good player and one who was similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, very misused in his time in college. And had he been on a better team, a more competitive roster, I think he would have been in a higher conversation as a draft prospect and as one of the top quarterbacks in the country. On top of that, you are also adding Billy Kemp and then the notorious and infamous Eric Gilbert, who we could sit here and talk all day if he's actually going to play a snap or not for Nebraska. Nonetheless, I think there's a lot of positive pieces that are coming into next year. They are not going to be immediately competing for a Big Ten championship. That's not going to happen. But I think with how he's already starting off and having the portal to work with, which he did not have in the past, means that he could have some pretty early around 500 success, maybe get to a bowl game.
I 1000% agree with you on the Sims comparison. I think he was completely just and utterly misused at Georgia Tech. I don't think that they used all of his abilities. You mentioned Eric Gilbert. Look, I will be the first to admit, as a guy that has covered him and a guy that really has seen a lot of his development, I don't want to say this in an insensitive way. Eric Gilbert has some issues, okay? And some of those he can't are out of his control because of just situations. And, I know that he's trying to get better with that. But if Eric Gilbert puts it all together, Joey's going to be the best tight end in this next class, and it won't be close. Can Matt Rhule find a way to start building? Look, Joe, I feel as if they get 6 or 7 wins, it's an absolute win for them. But as you mentioned, he's not had that type of success. Now, what I will say, though, Temple and Baylor in those situations aren't necessarily the same of what he's going into Nebraska. They still have some talent at Nebraska. Now, you look at what Matt Rhule's done, not just in the portal, but look, I guess you can, but he's gone out and gotten Ben Scott from Arizona State. He's gone out and got some edge guys. He went out and got, like you mentioned, Billy Kemp. Jacob Hood was a guy from Georgia that a lot of people slept on, and he got 2 underrated and guys from Georgia and MJ Sherman, who I think could come in and maybe play. I think they're at best a 6-win team, 6 or 7-win team. But I think for me, when you look at Nebraska and you had Scott Frost, who was not winning anything, bro, Joe, they lost to Northwestern in that week 0 game, remember, in Ireland.
That was bad.
You were thinking, okay, well, damn, that really stinks for Scott Frost, but Northwestern might not be that bad. And then we come out to find out that Northwestern was terrible. I just don't know what we can fully expect from Matt Rhule.
So here's where things are very different, though. Scott Frost, separate from, you kind of hear the stories where he was very clearly distracted. We'll leave it at that. Not a lot of really good stories coming from Scott Frost. Very clearly was showing up and reliving the glory days. According to a lot of time spent at the country club, apparently. But I think the big difference here, though, is
bad baby.
Scott Frost didn't recruit, though. He did a terrible job recruiting.
He did,
And,
you're right.
and the crazy thing is, for a program with such a storied history, and I even legitimately, like, I taped a reaction video saying after that first game, I'm like, you have to fire Scott Frost. And like, a lot of people called into question, I was one of these people, if it's even possible to recruit good guys to come to Nebraska. It's in the middle of freaking nowhere. Nebraska
They've done it before, though. They've done it before.
So that's my point, though, is that like the argument could have been made with how bad they've been under Scott Frost of like, wow, in the NIL era, is it not sexy to come play for Nebraska because you're like, hey, here's a bunch of corn. You want to come hang out here for 4 years?
What's there to do in Boulder?
Skiing and weed. But my point is that was a debate that was brought up of like, can you actually recruit to this location? Is it possible? And he's already stepped in. For him to finish 23rd to pull some 4-star recruits. And heck, I get on my Twitter feed, you got guys that are announcing their top 5s and their top 10s, and I keep seeing Nebraska in these top 10s, and I'm like, what is Matt Rhule doing that he's able to do this? That to me is what's really important, is he needs to keep attacking the portal, but the recruiting is why I am optimistic for the long term, and why I think at least right away that things are going to be pretty good, that you're going to have a rallying point at some point early on in the season where they'll finish with 7 wins and sneak themselves into a bowl game. I fully see them capable, especially with some turnover at coaching for some other programs in the Big Ten.
I do agree with you there, but I did think it was interesting when I was prepping for this segment. He did go into Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and Missouri, and he has gone into Big Ten country and got some kids that, look, are we trying to expect them to win the Big Ten? No, but it's not what Scott Frost was doing. Scott Frost tried to go back into Florida after being at, the national champion, UCF, and try to go back in there with teams like Florida, Miami, Florida State. Obviously, we know what Alabama and Georgia doing there, and it backfired on him massively. For a team like Nebraska, you have to hit the West Coast. You have to hit the Midwest. You can't go down in the Southeast because, as a guy that has lived, born, and bred in the Southeast, Joe, we hear the word Nebraska and we freak out, okay? But if you got some guys in the Midwest, like what he's actually recruiting to, who's in that footprint, they kind of live in that same type of cold weather, same type of understanding of the Midwest and Middle America. He's doing some good things. The ultimate thing for me, for Matt Rhule, is this. Has he surrounded himself with good play callers? Because ultimately we can sit here and we can talk about how Matt Rhule builds a team. Mm-hmm. But Matt Rhule, I'm not trying to defend my boy Joe Brady, but he threw Joe Brady under the bus 1,000 times over.
Yeah.
And you're sitting here and saying it's Joe Brady's fault. Dude, you got Sam Darnold, and you're trying to expect for Joe Brady. If things go wrong, though, Matt Rhule throws everybody under the bus besides him. And that's the thing that I hate about him the most. He is a me kind of guy. And I will tell you this. When COVID was going on, this dude didn't ever wear a mask. He wore the face shield. Anybody that wears a face shield during COVID cannot win national championships, okay? I can't get over this man was wearing a face shield. He was screaming and spit was hitting the shield and hitting him in his eye. And I'm like,
well, didn't Andy Reid wear the face shield too, though? And he won a Super Bowl. What did
who?
Andy Reid.
Andy Reid's different, though.
Oh, stop.
Different.
Stop.
It's different. It's just different.
Look, I agree, though, that there is legitimate concern, though, for how does he handle himself when things go awry, when things aren't going up to expectation. And I'm not talking about on the first season, because I think Matt Rhule has realistic expectations, knowing what it took to turn things around at the other 2 programs It took time. But
Mhm.
say in year 2, they bring in some big guys. Maybe they pull a crazy quarterback and they crap the bed. They lose a couple games early. How does he handle himself? Because not only does that impact your roster, but I think most importantly, if your coaching staff's not in support of you and you've got guys worried about their futures, that can be very detrimental. But yeah, I think the Joe Brady thing is a real cause for concern because he did not handle that situation well at all.
No, and he constantly threw Joe Brady under the bus. And then when they fired Joe Brady, the only thing that happened was they got 1,000 times worse. So I'll give this example, right? Like they go out and get Baker Mayfield. Okay. Well, they're horrible. Okay. Then Baker, we all know, goes to LA and they actually win games. Remember the game last year when Baker Mayfield, like on 3 days' notice, wins that game. He drove the ball like 90 yards on Monday Night Football, and they won a freaking game.
Yeah.
Matt Rhule was constantly out there blaming Baker Mayfield for things that he was doing inadequately. Then he goes to Sean McVay and then drives 90 yards and wins a game. My only thing is I don't know if he's got strong enough coordinators under him. Now, I know Tony White was at Syracuse. It's kind of a tough place to coach. But Marcus Satterfield is a guy that a lot of people are like, oh, my God, why is he going there? But they had a connection. He was at the Carolina Panthers. He was at Baylor with Matt Rhule. But at South Carolina, dude, I got to admit, offensively, I am a little interested in what Nebraska is going to do. Because we remember as that season went on for South Carolina, buddy, they weren't that bad. Look how much better Spencer Rattler got as the season went on. I will be interested to see how they do on the offensive side with Satterfield, but I know that Tony White is going to be a guy that I think is going to have to be the glue to hold this staff and this coach and these players together.
Right. Satterfield is really interesting, but still, I don't want to say he's unproven, but I'm not like, I need to see how he does going to Nebraska. I will admit though, with a hodgepodge, if you will, of talent at South Carolina, if in a way,
it's kind of a lot of the same situation, Joe, in a sense.
Well, what I was getting at is that it was kind of like a grouping of, misfit toys. You've got all these guys that are really talented, like Austin Stogner, Jaheim Bell, who's just a really strange player because it's like, what position is he actually? Is he a tight end? Is he an H-back? And then most importantly,
he's Antonio Gates, bro.
He's really freaking good. But like coming into the season, it's like, what is this guy? How good can he be? And I was really high on him as a draft prospect. He ends up deciding to transfer to Florida State. But most importantly here is like, what can you do with Spencer Rattler? And that was troublesome. Like at the beginning, the first half of the year, it's like, wow, this is terrible. This is horrible to watch. And I was legitimately questioning the future of Beamer as a head coach. And I'm like, this is what we're supposed to be buying into as a coach. Is this going to be long-term success? But they turned it around. They figured out ways to quickly shift things around. And it's not like things got a little bit better. It was a total 180 flip from being anemic and incapable of moving the ball to being one of the most explosive offenses in the country in that final stretch of games. And Spencer Rattler was playing up to that 5-star potential that we all thought that he was capable of being at. Now there's a little momentum for him going into next season. So I definitely think that Satterfield is an interesting hire, but it's like, how does he do? Which version of him do we get? Do we get the first half version and the last year version, or the second half of 2022 version?
Their schedule does set up a little bit interesting for them. So they start off with Minnesota, at Minnesota, then they go to Colorado. And I think you could see like, hey, which coach? I think that Colorado game, it's like, which coach did better year one? Like who recruited better? Who went to the portal better? I think that that's going to be one of the more interesting games. But let's just say if they split Colorado and Minnesota for just argument's sake, they got Northern Illinois, they got Louisiana Tech, then they got Michigan and Illinois, 2 games that I think that they can lose. But Northwestern, then Purdue is a team that I think that they can beat. Michigan State, what's Mel Tucker? Can Mel Tucker rebound? Okay. I do think that there are some interesting games, because here's what the crazy thing is, Joe. It's not as if that Scott Frost and them. Now they had some games where they got absolutely blown out. Don't get it twisted, Joe. Scott Frost lost more games by one possession in 3 years than any other coach combined in the Power Five in that time frame. That is insane to me that you can lose that many games by one possession. Like, we're talking about all Power Five opponent teams around the country in 3 years, and Nebraska had more of those games combined than everybody else. Does Matt Rhule get them over the edge in just half of those? If he can do it in just half of those, Joe, they're a 6-6, 7-5 team, in my opinion.
So, Blake, my thing with that, where, first of all, Scott Frost kept bringing that up as an excuse. And then on top of that, defenders of Scott Frost were like, well, they're losing these really close games. As much as people want to use that as an example of potential success, I use that as an example of terrible coaching. If you can't finish those games and you can't win those games, and it happens that many times, that's an indicator that you do not have a good coaching staff. Plain and simple.
Let me throw this your way.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a debating topic for a different day. I think that there are certain teams. I'm not saying Nebraska is one of these. Certain teams, because of the way that they recruit, no matter who your coach is, you're going to win 6 games. I will give an LSU example. I think elite coaches are worth 3 games. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
LSU went 6-6 and 5-5 the last 2 seasons. Brian Kelly's inserted. They win 4 more games. How many games is Matt Rhule worth? Right? Like, if they can get there with Scott Frost, can they overcome some of those, though, with Matt Rhule? That would be my only question. Like, if you're in the situation where Michigan just can't score and you're down by 7, can you answer the bell? I just want to see it, because if they can, Joe, they can turn this around a lot quicker than we thought. But 2024 is the year that they got to recruit at a high level, and if they don't, they're going to be in big trouble. They're going to be in big trouble. Okay, so we got about 15 more minutes.
Yes, sir.
I do want to transition, because we'll talk a lot of Matt Rhule. I do want to transition because I think me and you will agree, but we probably are going to pick the same team.
Well, we are picking the same team.
Well, I have some honorable mentions in there that maybe we talk about.
Okay.
But a topic's been brought up. Cam Rogers over Believe asked me to do some sleeper teams, and I got ridiculed because they're like, those aren't sleeper teams. I think one thing that we got to do on these sleeper teams as we transition here, define what a sleeper team is. Like, I still think a top 25 team can be a sleeper team. Right?
Yes.
And so, with that being said, I guess we'll start off here with you. Who is your sleeper team going into 2023?
My sleeper team, after doing very in-depth research, I'm going with Wisconsin here, as we mentioned at the top of the show. But, Blake, I think by definition, the way that I'm looking at it is a team that it doesn't have to be outside of the top 25, but a team that wasn't in that top 10, top 5 contention last season. And that is in a position to make a very massive surge in production and in success. And the reason why I'm going with Wisconsin is, obviously, Luke Fickell is a big reason why I'm picking them here. Luke Fickell does not get enough credit for being as good of a coach as he is. To get Cincinnati to the level of success that they were at took multiple years of great coaching, recruiting, and just overall culture building at Cincinnati. I think that is going to be an immediate step in and a takeoff from what was left for him with the previous roster. They're not losing a ton. Keanu Benton's one of the biggest names that they're losing. Joe Tippmann, who's one of their starting offensive linemen, they're losing both those guys to the NFL draft. A lot of that starting offensive line, not all of it, is returning. And Wisconsin had a pretty good starting unit. Braylon Allen am I tripping here? Braylon Allen did not hop in the portal, right? He's returning.
I'm checking that right now. I don't think so.
Okay.
It doesn't look like it.
Braylon Allen is one of the next great Wisconsin running backs, and we saw that he is filling in line with guys like Jonathan Taylor and Melvin Gordon. He's that productive, that good of a running back.
Damn, you think so?
I think that, well, we've seen his production early on as a young player, and last year he maybe took a little bit of a step back, but I think that he's got all the talent in the world to be a really good player and one that can be leaned on by Luke Fickell early on in this first season. The most important thing is getting Tanner Mordecai and Nick Evers to compete for the quarterback job. And at the very least, Nick Evers takes over the following year, who's a younger player. Tanner Mordecai is a great quarterback. One that
You think so?
I think that he wasn't given enough recognition for being.
And he was at Wyoming, correct?
No, he was at Fresno State, and I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think he got enough credit for how good of a quarterback he was over the past few years at Fresno State. And when he hopped in the portal, when he picked Wisconsin, that is a huge pickup for them. For me overall,
Mordecai was at SMU.
What did I say? SMU is what I meant to say. Sorry, I mixed up those
Fresno
two schools.
State. I was like, wait.
That's Jake Haener. That's Jake Haener.
Right.
He was at SMU. Regardless, I focused on here for my team. What I was looking for is who has the top returning production, and they're one of the top teams in the country for returning production, and for teams that finished with high rankings in the transfer portal, and they finished top 10 with the transfer portal class. All of that combined, I think, is going to set them up for a really, really nice season next year.
I think I think that Luke Fickell, I agree with you. Luke Fickell's a guy that not a lot of people talk about. I was really surprised now that Cincinnati's going to the Big 12 that he flipped and went to Wisconsin of all places. Dude, him pulling Philip Longo, and what he did there, and then how good that his teams have been defensively, and then you go get a really big offensive weapon, offensive play caller. Dude, you know how crazy it's going to be to watch Wisconsin throwing the football all over the yard? Dude, just in a matter of weeks, they got so much more athletic on the outside. It is so wild how much better they went and got speed. Also, they've gotten some of their key pieces, their big pieces, from Cincinnati to transfer to Wisconsin. They got an offensive lineman. They got some receivers. The only thing, though, it's like when you talk about sleeper, do I think that they can make a Big Ten title game because they're in the opposite division of Michigan and Ohio State? Yes. The reason I pick them is because their side of the division is so weak and so bad. It doesn't take a lot to win that division. Okay. Now, admittedly, I didn't go down their schedule. I don't know if they have a Michigan or anybody this year. I don't think that they do. But that division that they're in has always been weak in the Big Ten, and I think that they can make some waves. You know, another team, though, that I think that I'm really interested to watch in that same conference is Michigan State. Michigan State had that, yes, because they had a massive year 2 years ago, okay? Then they kind of had to reset, and I do wonder if Mel Tucker can retool, re-energize that team to get better. I don't think that he can, but he's done it before, which is really interesting to me and why I'm watching them. Can they beat Ohio State? I don't think so. Can they beat Michigan? I don't think so. But I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch them. Can they get back to that 10-win mark? Because, look, they got it before. Why? Who says that what they've done, they can't do it again?
I'm reluctant to commit to that because, like, what have they done to change the program since last year? You know, like, what have they done to take a step forward? And, like, I don't know of any big name recruits that are picking Michigan State. I just think that the era of college football requires them to, if they're going to pick things up, is to have added some key guys in the transfer portal. And I don't know about Michigan State, though. Like, I think that one's really tough for me to commit to. And frankly, Mel Tucker might have been a bit of an overrated coach for what we thought he was. I think that signing him to that long-term deal was an overprotection by these programs that were sniffing around and trying to hire him up the last cycle when there were that many big job openings. And they might have put themselves in a really bad position. He's proven the ability to win, but can he replicate it? The big reason why they were as good as they were is because of Kenneth Walker, and they don't have a guy like that on the roster, at least not that I know of.
Well, they did have a pretty middle of the pack recruiting class. They had a 23rd overall class. Okay. They didn't do horrible in recruiting. Okay. And when you don't do horrible in recruiting and you do some interesting things in the portal. So like when I was looking at them, like as an example, like guys that are already enrolled, like I think Jared Jackson, who was at Florida State, is really interesting. They went and got Tyneil Hopper from Boise State, who a lot of people did like. Like I talked to an SEC coach about Hopper who thought like, hey, man, that's a sneaky good pickup if he can have some production. But I just don't know if they have the weapons and the production on the outside to where they can even move the ball consistently, which would worry me if I'm them. Here are some teams that I'm going to, in kind of a rapid fire though, that are honorable mentions for me. What about North Carolina?
So North Carolina was another one who I was racking my brain on, where I thought that they fit this perfectly. They played well last year. They kind of sizzled out at the end of the year. Phil Longo's gone. You're making a transition there. They're one of the top teams in terms of returning production as well. They were one at the very top in the top 10. Losing Josh Downs is going to be detrimental. Great, very talented receiver. But Drake May, man, if he plays up to the potential and he plays a full season the way that he did, and we know, and I will say it a million times on this show, the ACC freaking stinks. And if you play above average football, you can win the ACC. It is going to be a battle between them, Florida State, and Clemson. And it's how they play at the end of the season is going to be really important. I think that is a really good pick to bring up.
The only reason I don't give two shits what they did in recruiting or the portal, I don't care that Longo's gone. If Drake May is half of what you draft analysts say he is, that's all I need to know. With elite quarterback play, you can win 10 games. Okay? So if he's as good as y'all say he is, which I don't know, we'll see. I think he does good things in the pocket. I will admit, I thought it was weird that he didn't even get an invite to New York last year. Was
he really shit the bed at the end of the season? That was
hey, you know who well, so did Caleb Williams.
But he finished the season he finished the season strong and then shit the bed in the Pac-12 championship game.
Fingernails shit the bed too now.
He did, but it was after it was determined who was going to New York.
The Pac-12 championship game to lose, or two
but they determined who was going to the Heisman ceremony before that game was played. He shouldn't have won the award. I don't think he should have won the award, but they already knew the winner.
Remember when he liked our tweet?
He liked your tweet.
He liked my tweet, calling him out.
Sucks. He sucks. As a person.
You can't put that on your fingernails. Look, we can debate if he should have been in New York. He did get bad as the season kind of went on there at the end. But if he's as good as you say he is, then he can lead a team. Okay, that would be my point. Yes. If he's a top overall pick, then I need to see something for him. And then, I don't know. Let me just tell you this.
Yeah.
So when everybody talks about Drake May and I watch him, and then I hear the same people talking about Anthony Richardson being a first-round pick, and those same people are so over Drake, all on Drake May, and then they're
they're very different though.
I get it, but your quarterback expertise to me goes so out the window when you say Anthony Richardson is a good.
But the thing is, though, with Blake, with the two of them, is that Anthony Richardson hasn't played a lot of football, and he's 20 years old. When we're talking about Drake,
they're both starters this year.
But Drake May has another year of college football to still get still improve. But here's the thing with Anthony Richardson is that the conversations about both of them are very different. Drake May is more polished and I think ready, and he's very clearly probably going to be the first overall pick in the following class if he plays up to the potential, that or Caleb Williams. Anthony Richardson's his first-round pick for a lot of different reasons. He's a first-round pick because of the potential.
That, man. Y'all
because of the potential.
Y'all gotta stop with that. Y'all got to stop with that.
Dude, his ceiling is insane. His ceiling is the best in the class. It's better than Will Levis. It's better than Will Levis.
It's not.
If he can get it anywhere close to that ceiling, he is so freaking talented.
You know what I hear every time somebody says ifs?
What?
I hear fart noises every time somebody. But if he does this, if he does that, I hear blah, blah, blah. It's like diarrhea of the mouth. Y'all stop with this if.
Like
now, I will say.
Okay.
Eric Bieniemy going to the Commanders.
Watch out.
Screams that they're going to Anthony Richardson.
But here's my thing, though, Blake. Again, just to wrap this point, and I got one more sleeper team, and then we're done here. Anthony Richardson, out of very few quarterbacks, can play as well as he did without having any goddamn clue on how to play the position. There are not a lot of guys on this planet that can do that, to make plays and to very clearly not have a handle on how to play quarterback. And that's what everybody keeps talking about. He's just a really good athlete that
but look,
doesn't know how to play the position and just makes plays. And you know who
Dan Mullen stinks?
I don't think it has anything to do with Dan Mullen.
Well, then why hasn't he developed more?
Well, he was really young in his first. I would argue that's
freshman quarterbacks like coming.
That's detrimental to switch coaches the way that he did is very detrimental to his development. A lot of people got to switch coaches.
A lot of people got to switch coaches. It's not an excuse.
It's hard to have consistent development when you're switching coaches.
No, I agree with that. I'll agree with that. But let's not. Come on now.
But but the thing is, though, is everyone wants to talk about Will Levis this, Will Levis that. I don't think that Will Levis is any more polished than Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis is 4 years older than him. So I don't know why we're doing that.
Okay.
Game. My last sleeper team. I don't want to take you too far down this rabbit hole. I brought it up when we were doing our pre-show notes. I think Ole Miss deserves to be brought, and it's contingent.
Ew.
Listen, contingent on if Spencer Sanders plays, and we talked about. Maybe he's got the shoulder issue before we were taping. I don't know what the situation is with that. But the way the grouping that they pulled in the transfer portal, and then on top of that, man, Quinshon Judkins a really good freaking running back.
He is.
A really freaking good running back. I think that you can get things rolling and pick up where you left off last year. And Spencer Sanders is a lot better than Jackson Dart. If he plays, man, watch out. They might be a sneaky team in the SEC.
I don't think offensively we have to worry about them. I think they're always going to score points. They've been top 10 offenses since Lane Kiffin's been there.
Yeah,
it's what can Pete Golding do defensively? Joe, they've been so bad defensively, it's laughable at times. It has nothing to do with offense with me with Ole Miss. Everything to do with defensively. They just don't get guys up front that can compete in the SEC. Joe, they can get all the weapons all the live long day. Until they start recruiting better and more at a high level up front, they're not going to be anything to me. I'm just being honest. Now, I'm going to flip this on you, and you're going to laugh. Everybody's going to rip me alive on my next honorable mention. Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is interesting because they still have very elite talent on both lines of scrimmage. Joe, you cannot ignore, Joe, in 2 years and a year and 2 years, you're going to have 5 potential first-round picks on that defensive line. You will. They got Reuben Owens that they just brought in. They got some weapons now. Now, I will tell you this. Here's the only thing. I don't trust Jimbo Fisher as far as I can throw his bald-headed scallywag. Okay?
That's the point.
That's the reason they weren't my team.
Okay.
However, you cannot deny that they have some very, very good talent on the defensive side of the ball. Now, some of those kids left. I get that. They've done some interesting things. Connor Weigman is a guy that I saw last year that I thought, hey, man, This kid does have some skill. Can Petrino bring that out in him? I just want to Joe, when you recruit that good up front, it doesn't, and you can run the football.
Yeah.
Brother, there were times last year they had three defensive linemen. They were a top defense in the SEC. They were really good defensively. The problem that they had was their offense was so bad that it made the defense look that much worse. They got talent up front. I said, look, the build up to that LSU week, I said it all week, got ridiculed. I said LSU's not going to be able to win that battle up front if they don't bring their lunch pail. Remember what happened?
Yeah.
They competed with teams like Alabama. I thought that they beat Alabama in the trenches. They just didn't. They were so young on the outside that they just couldn't overcome it. They got guys returning like Evan Stewart. They got some decent pieces. Let's see what they can do. But in reference to winning 10 games, I don't think that they can get there.
I don't think they sniff 10 games, if I'm being completely honest. I don't want to put them on this honorable mention list. I think Texas A&M stinks. I think Connor Weigman's a really good player, but to your point, they've got the amount of 5-star kids that they brought in that one class and the talent that they have is fantastic.
It is, man.
It's jaw-dropping, some of those guys that they have, but just a lack of discipline and control. And I know that kind of worked at Florida State for Jimbo, where everybody was kind of doing their own thing and doing whatever they wanted. You got Jameis Winston walking out with crab legs at the grocery store. But I just think that this has already gone awry. Like, everything's fallen apart already. It is a mess, and we're just kind of waiting for the fire department to come in and put out the fire. That's the reality of it. The damage has already been done. I don't know how, as a team, that you can buy in after being in that locker room and seeing how things were handled, which clearly were handled very poorly, that the amount of kids that hopped in the portal for them was as high as it was. I can't buy in. I really can't buy in. And I think Jimbo gets fired next season. I really do.
A lot of money to pay a guy not to coach.
Well, they have to hire someone cheap then.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Joseph,
all right, Blake.
Great episode.
Good work.
We'll see. Till next week, next Monday. We'll see y'all soon. You have a good night or have a good day. Peace out.